upgrade to
Yeah,
the.
that's what my suggestion. If you feel that will be better.
We'll definitely
sir.
consider this positively.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So now we will start with the posters. I welcome the presenter and the moderator. Dr. Khan will coordinate with the further.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
So we will stick on to the time. So 10 minutes past of the regular time. Khan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good evening, one and all. Respected senior surgeons, colleagues, and the postgraduates. Welcome you all to this 6th online monthly clinical meet. No, it is 5 minutes, sir, poster. 3+2 discussion. So we are done with the postgraduate teaching program. We will move ahead to the e-poster presentation from both the institutes. The judge for this session will be Dr. Lokesh, sir. Sir, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Good evening, all.
Lokesh, sir. Hello.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, can you hear me, Dr. Lokesh?
Yes. Thank you.
So with
good
your
evening, all.
permission, with your permission, shall we go ahead with the first presenter?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we have a first presenter from Vaidehi Institute, Dr. Gautam J. Reddy, who will be doing a e-poster on metastatic ileal stricture causing intestinal obstruction.
Gautam, 3 minutes for the presentation and the 2 minutes for the discussion and questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please proceed, Gautam.
Good evening. I would like to thank the President, Secretary, and the HOD of General Surgery, Vaidehi, and all my staff for giving me this opportunity. So today I'll be presenting a poster about small bowel obstruction secondary to metastatic ileal stricture under the guidance of Professor Dr. Narayana V and Dr. Kalpana Vinith, Department of General Surgery, Vaidehi. So a case summary, a 49-year-old lady presented with upper abdominal pain since 15 days, which was aggravated since 3 days, and it was associated with bilious vomiting since 1 day. Patient also gave history of not passing of stool since 1 day. In the past history, patient had undergone laparoscopic cholecystectomy 2 years back. Histopathological examination of that revealed adenocarcinoma of gallbladder, but patient had not followed up further. There was no significant family history. On examination, the vitals were stable. Per abdomen, it was distended. Diffuse tenderness was present. No guarding or rigidity. No palpable mass, and bowel sounds was sluggish. Per rectal examination was normal. So another systemic examination was unremarkable. Erect X-ray abdomen was done, which showed multiple air fluid levels, suggesting a small bowel obstruction. Other routine blood investigations were within normal limits. CA 19.9 was done, which was elevated, and CA was within normal limit. USG abdomen showed dilated small bowel loops with fecal matters, likely intestinal obstruction. So the next investigation, we did a PET-CT. So in PET-CT, there was no evidence of local recurrence, no lymph node metastasis, and there was a zone of transition in the right lower quadrant distal ileal segment, query stricture due to infective or inflammatory changes. So after the PET-CT, we took the patient up for exploratory laparotomy and proceed. So the intraoperative findings were there was distended small bowel loops, minimal ascitic fluid. There were no peritoneal lesions. The liver and the gallbladder fossa looked normal, and there was a stricture of about 4 centimeters at the ileocecal junction. So this is the cross section of the stricture. So we did right hemicolectomy with endoileostomy, and the resected specimen was sent for histopathological examination. So on histopathology, there was pools of mucin extending up to the serosa. The tumor cells were scattered singly in acina patterns and in groups lying within the mucin pools. The cells were moderate in size with high nucleocytoplasmic ratio and prominent nucleoli. So histopathological diagnosis was mucinous adenocarcinoma of ileocolic region, query primary or secondary, and the ascitic fluid analysis showed no malignant cells. So for further diagnosis of the immunohistochemistry was done. So in that we sent cytokeratin 7, 20 and 19 was positive, and CDX2 was negative. So depending on, based on all the findings, our final diagnosis was small bowel obstruction due to ileocecal junction stricture, which was secondary to the metastasis from gallbladder carcinoma. So patient was then started on palliative therapy with gemcitabine and cisplatin. So coming to the discussion part, gallbladder carcinoma, it accounts for 0.5% of GI malignancy. It is highly fatal malignancy, and most of the patients are most of the cases are seen in patients undergoing simple cholecystectomy for biliary stone disease. And the gallbladder carcinoma spreads by direct invasion into liver, hematogenous spread, lymphatic spread, and peritoneal spread. And it has propensity for intra-abdominal recurrence after resection. The initial site of recurrence is distant and mostly in the peritoneum.
Conclude, please.
So conclude in the literature, there's only one case reported of gallbladder carcinoma metastasis to the ileocecal valve, and so ours was also a similar case. So we could not diagnose it only on the histopathological examination, but we also needed the help of immunohistochemistry to arrive at this diagnosis.
The poster is open for discussion. Lokesh sir, any questions from you?
Yeah. Doctor, can you tell me, did you work it up as retrospectively or prospectively? You did all these investigations before proceeding for surgery?
Before proceeding for surgery, we got all this investigation. We got only PET-CT, sir, because patient presented with past history of gallbladder cancer. So we thought there might be any mets.
What was the CA 199 level, please?
Sir, 70, sir.
70 before surgery.
Yes, sir, before
Any
surgery.
other sites of metastasis were there?
Sir, no, sir. On PET-CT, there was no metastasis. Sir.
Okay, PET-CT may not show sometimes because the uptake may be low.
Yes,
So
sir.
what about the gallbladder fossa? What happened?
Sir, on intraoperatively gallbladder fossa, it didn't show. There was no abnormality, sir. It was normal.
Lymph nodes around the periportal?
So nothing. There were no enlarged lymph nodes.
Okay, so what would have been the ideal thing to be done when there is a gallbladder malignancy detected on laparoscopic cholecystectomy incidentally?
Sir, then we should convert it into a open surgery, and then all the
get to know some information on table when you think that this gallbladder is not looking normal.
Yes.
Okay, you cannot try to do FNAC or other things because spillage deposits.
Spillage of the tumor cells.
You don't know whether that deposit happened because of laparoscopy.
Yes, sir.
Because these things are known for drop metastasis. So there should have been a conversion, and you should have done a
Sir, as a patient had undergone laparoscopic cholecystectomy in outside hospital, sir, 2 years back.
Correct. Ideally, if you are the surgeon, you have done laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and then report shows malignancy. Already surgery is done. What would have done? So
then we will assess the status. We'll see the previous. We'll follow up the histopathological report, biopsy report.
What report would you look into?
So in report we'll see for the stage, sir. So depending upon the stage, if any further surgery is required, then we'll.
Lesion is T1, limited to lamina propria. Small lesion limited to lamina propria. T1 lesion. What would you do?
Sir, if it is a T1 lesion, then simple cholecystectomy will suffice.
Already surgery is done. That is why we are talking about. Okay.
Then we'll follow up it for any recurrences.
Yes, very good. So what if it is beyond that?
Sir, if it is beyond that, then we'll have to do a radical cholecystectomy, sir.
You should also look for the margins positivity.
Margin positive. We should frozen section of the cystic duct until we get positive margins, and then the segment 4. Sir?
Negative margin. Negative margin.
For negative margin. And then some segment 4B of the liver also will have to excise.
Yes.
Along with the
4B and 5 of the adjacent has to be removed. So
Along with the
radical
lymph nodes.
cholecystectomy with around 2 centimeters normal liver margin has to be taken out. Okay.
Yes.
What if your
Yes, sir.
cystic duct margin comes positive in the frozen section?
Sir, if cystic duct, then we'll completely excise the cystic duct and we'll plan for hepaticojejunostomy.
Yes, you will have to remove the common hepatic,
Common
common bile
hepatic
duct also.
bile.
Okay, until you get negative this thing. Otherwise,
Yes.
the tumor can recur. What about the lymph nodes?
Sir, we'll have to remove the lymph nodes, excise the lymph nodes also, sir.
What
Around the
about lymph
cystic,
nodes?
around the cystic duct, common hepatic duct,
Called as
pericaval.
periportal nodes. Okay,
Yes, sir.
periportal, some retropancreatic, celiac group of nodes.
Yes, sir.
If celiac group of nodes are positive, it is bad prognosis.
Yes, sir. First four.
You said palliative chemotherapy. Palliative chemotherapy, palliation is the word used for symptomatic treatment. Okay. Palliation is a word used for symptomatic treatment. When you have removed the disease, there is no, even when there is gross measurable disease also, unless it is for symptomatic relief, it is still called as therapy.
Yes.
Okay, even if it is a stage 4 disease also, it is not palliative, it is therapy. You treat, whether the patient responds, duration of survival is secondary.
Okay.
Palliation is when the patient is having some symptoms, like somebody is having a bone metastasis, you give chemotherapy so that it shrinks and symptoms come down, or pain, if there is any other problem, pain, okay, ascites is there, you give chemotherapy to shrink the ascites, that is palliation.
Venkat sir, we are running out of time for the discussion, sir.
Any question from the judge, please, because judge has to.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Oh, it's okay. Can
Okay.
come.
Thank you, sir.
You have to mute others.
Yeah, I'm voting.
Lot of noise is coming.
Yes, sir.
Harish, if
Yes,
there is
sir, I'm
some
putting-
interesting discussion, we can add few more minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. No, that is because it is ultimately a teaching program. Okay, but we'll try to stick to the time.
Yeah, because the discussion went more than the presentation.
That should happen because that people should ultimately carry message at the end of the discussion, isn't it? Okay.
Okay, we have our next presenter from Vaidhi Institute of Medical Science. She is Dr. Amruta. She will be doing a e-poster presentation on a case of blunt abdominal trauma with isolated gallbladder rupture. Sit down.
Good evening. I thank President Surgical Society of Bangalore, members of SSB, Professor Dr. Ramesh Reddy sir and Dr. Shekhar sir, Department of Surgery, WIMS and RC for giving me this opportunity to present this poster. I'm going to present a case of blunt abdominal trauma with the isolated gallbladder rupture. A 22-year-old male gives history of fall from bike on his right side in a small town in Ballari. He was refused further evaluation in other centers due to prevailing COVID situation. He presented 4 days later with right upper abdominal pain, which developed in a few hours following the fall. This was associated with loose stools, reduced appetite, and disturbed sleep. He also had breathing difficulty since 2 days. On examination, pulse rate was 100 beats per minute. BP was 130 by 80 millimeter mercury. Per abdomen, examination showed tense and distended abdomen with an abrasion in the right hypochondriac area. There was diffuse tenderness, guarding and rigidity. Bowel sounds were sluggish. Respiratory system, decreased breath sounds in the left basal region. Probable diagnosis, diffuse peritonitis secondary to hollow viscous perforation or solid organ injury. On investigation, hemoglobin, PCV, and albumin levels were low. WBC count, serum creat and urea was elevated. Chest X-ray showed bilateral pleural effusion with consolidatory changes. Lateral decubitus abdominal radiograph showed no evidence of pneumoperitoneum. Abdominal sonogram suggested free fluid in the abdomen and pelvis with internal echoes and thick septations. Visualized bowel loop shows sluggish to absent peristalsis. Cholelithiasis with gallbladder sludge, increased echo texture of both the kidneys, mild to moderate left-sided pleural effusion and right-sided minimal effusion. CCT abdomen and pelvis could not be done due to high serum creat level. Patient underwent emergency exploratory laparotomy under general anesthesia. Intraoperatively, approximately 1000 ml of blood-stained peritoneal fluid was evacuated along with clots. Bile-stained bowel loops noted. No injury to bowel, mesentery, diaphragm, liver, spleen, and pelvic organs. On evacuating the clot in subhepatic area, gallbladder rupture was noted near the fundus with an active bleed from the wall. Gallbladder was dissected from the liver bed and partial cholecystectomy was done in view of inflamed and friable gallbladder wall. This is a picture showing the ruptured gallbladder. On microscopic findings, there was no evidence of dysplasia or malignancy, feature suggestive of chronic cholecystitis. Patient on ventilator was shifted to ICU. Intraoperatively and postoperatively, 5 units of packed cells were transfused. Patient underwent hemodialysis due to deranged RFT and pleural tapping was done for effusion and 400 ml of serous fluid aspirated. Postoperative period was uneventful and patient was discharged 2 weeks later. Discussion. Trauma remains the most common cause of death between the age of 1 and 44. 10% of these fatality are attributable to abdominal injuries. Hollow viscous injury following blunt abdominal trauma is an infrequent diagnosis with an incidence of 4 to 15%. An isolated gallbladder injury which results from a blunt abdominal trauma is rare with an incidence 0.5 to 0.6% among all the intra-abdominal injuries. The low rate of blunt trauma to the gallbladder is due to its protected anatomical location. Most gallbladder injuries occurs following motor vehicle accidents and direct blow in sports. Gallbladder perforation is more likely in case when the gallbladder is distended and thin-walled at the time of injury. Exploratory laparotomy is confirmatory for diagnosing gallbladder injury. Timescale of surgical intervention is an important prognostic factor.
The poster is open for discussion.
Thank you.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, sir.
You said it's a case of blunt trauma abdomen.
Yes, sir.
And the most your findings are suggestive of tenderness and guarding all in the right hypochondria. But throughout your entire presentation, you're not bothered about evaluating the liver. Not even in the ultrasound also, you're not mentioned whether what is the status of the liver.
There was no other solid organ injury, sir.
No, you can't do that, no? When you're presenting, if it is a blunt trauma, what do you think? Solid organs will get injured or hollow viscous will get injured?
Solid organ injury is most common.
Yeah, at least I agree with maybe a rare case of gallbladder injury, isolated,
Yes.
but you should always evaluate for more common things first.
Yes.
And even in exploratory laparotomy also, you haven't mentioned about the status of the liver. Did you not bother to inspect the liver during exploratory laparotomy?
We have inspected the liver, sir. There was no
But,
any injury in the liver.
Why
It
there
was
is no
not-
mention of that in
No, she did.
It
Your
has been
operative.
mentioned. It
She
is
did,
mentioned
sir.
in the intraoperative findings.
Dr.
Okay.
Lokesh, she did very clearly that all other things were normal. She mentioned it.
Sir, I know that, but for post-graduation, I am asking this. Sir.
No, but there is no point trying to find fault when there isn't any fault.
No, sir, I am not trying to find fault. I am asking since it's a very rare presentation, upon such presentation, they should have evaluated for all the common findings first. That's what I am trying to point out.
In that case, do we move on to the next presenter, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a next presenter from Vaidehi Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. S.V. Gautam. He will be doing a e-poster presentation on a case of locally invasive sarcomatoid carcinoma of penis.
A warm good evening to one and all. Today I'm going to present. I'm here to present my poster presentation, which is a case of an unusual case of penile spindle cell malignancy, under the guidance of Professor Dr. Sanjay sir. Coming to introduction, sarcomatoid carcinomas are uncommon, high-grade biphasic tumors which mainly consist of anaplastic spindle cells. These are rare, representing only 1 to 2% of all penile cancers. Microscopic diagnosis of this is very challenging. This is considered as a variant of squamous cell carcinoma or as a metaplastic differentiation of the mesenchyme. The tumor has both lymphatic and hematogenous spread and is a very aggressive tumor and has a high mortality rate. Coming to the case, a 49-year-old male presented with a painful fungating growth over the penis and scrotum since 1 year. Ulceration initially started at glance and healed spontaneously. After a few days, similar ulcer was now noted over the skin at root of penis, and which eventually progressed into ulceroproliferative growth and was associated with severe pain. Patient had difficulty in passing urine, and so suprapubic catheterization was done. Past history of undergoing buccal mucosal graft urethroplasty 16 years ago for stricture urethra. Known case of active extrapulmonary TB, which is a genitourinary TB and is currently on treatment. And the patient doesn't have any other comorbidities. Patient is a chronic smoker since 15 years. Coming to the examination findings, a 15-cross Stoll ulceroproliferative lesion involving proximal shaft of penis, which is extending up to base of scrotum and also involving the skin of scrotum. Severe tenderness is present. Autoamputation of penis shaft noted, and shaft of penis is hanging by urethra. Induration is present. Hypopigmentation noted over glans penis or urethral and urethral meatus. Bilateral testis appears uninvolved. Bilateral inguinal lymph nodes were not palpable. Patient had an outside report, which is a Lowenstein-Johnson culture report suggestive of tubercular etiology, which is diagnosed as lupus vulgaris. And patient had a histopathological report stating granulomatous inflammation with necrosis and with AFB positivity, feature suggestive of genitourinary tuberculosis. Suprapubic catheterization was done outside as patient was treated conservatively for the past 8 months. Coming to investigations which we have done is the ultrasound abdomen and pelvis, which shows no enlarged lymph nodes and there is no sonological abnormality detected. Routine blood investigation were within the normal limits. Coming to intraoperative findings, slough of penis involving both corpora, scrotum is involved extensively. Indurated margins were excised till the healthy tissue. A fistulous opening noted just below proximal urethra at bladder neck. Bilateral testis and spermatic cords appears to be uninvolved. Total penectomy was done. Bilateral testis preserved. Unhealthy tissue all around was debrided. And this is the operative images, and the one which we have clamped is the urethra, and the digital examination shows the fistulous opening. And we have laid the bilateral testis out in the open. Coming to histopathology, epithelium showing squamous hyperplasia with keratohyalin granules. Anaplastic spindle shells were arranged in diffuse sheets. Areas of myxoid changes, cells have bizarre nuclei and prominent nucleoli with a brisk mitotic rate of 7 to 8 hyperfields. Numerous Jane cells were noted. Perineural invasion was noted. Fibrocollagenous stroma is also noted. Coming to discussion, risk factors include a lack of neonatal circumcision, phimosis, HPV infection, tobacco products, penile lichen sclerosis, and potentially penile trauma. These are biphasic tumors with an intimate admixture of both carcinomatous and sarcomatous elements, as they have epithelial and mesenchymal components. Perineural invasion was recently found to be a strong predictor of lymph nodal metastasis. Distant metastasis in the absence of regional node metastasis are unusual. Patients with cancer of the penis more than the patients with other types of cancer seems to delay seeking medical attention due to embarrassment, guilt, fear, and ignorance. Palliative surgery may be considered in advanced ulcerated tumors, providing temporary tumor regression and pain relief. And to conclude, sarcomatoid carcinoma of the penis, which is a variant of squamous cell carcinoma, is an unusually rapidly growing tumor of the penis associated with the development of early metastatic spread and a poor prognosis. Differential diagnoses include leiomyosarcoma, malignant fibrous histiocytoma, amelanotic melanoma, and lupus vulgaris, which is in our case. The take-home message: in literature, though genitourinary TB progression to malignancy is not found, concomitant presentation of genitourinary TB and malignancy is a well-documented and an expected norm, which is seen in our case. And these are my references. Thank you.
Poster is open for discussion.
Interesting case. What happened to the urethra? We know the total penectomy was done and testes were preserved.
Yes, sir. We have ligated the urethra for now, sir. And we wanted to do a follow-up surgery later, which is a Kettle dog procedure. And we
Was
have
it not
done.
possible to put the urethra down to the perineum?
Yes, sir. Perineal ureterostomy is the one which you are proposing, but here no, sir.
What
Not
was
in,
the
not at this stage.
posterior extent of your incision?
Sir.
What was the posterior extent of your incision?
Sir, this we have considered only as a lupus vulgaris case. Only after the excision of the tumor, we got to know that it is a sarcomatoid carcinoma of penis.
Was no biopsy done earlier?
Yes, sir. Biopsy was done earlier outside, sir. Before presenting it to us, which I have mentioned here.
You didn't get it reviewed.
Yes. No, sir, because it was done in a reputed center.
I understand
So
it
we
was an
didn't
urgent
like to do it.
procedure. No, even if it is done in a reputed institution with the reputed pathologist, your pathologist is going to save you.
Yes, sir.
You cannot ask that pathologist to come to medical council or the court of law. So always you take your pathologist into confidence, please. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Or
sir.
some other
Hello.
pathologist whom you trust.
Hello, Khan, Dr. Khan. Hello,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Khan. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
sir.
I
Yes,
am I am Dr. Mahesh, plastic
Good
surgeon.
evening, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I have a few questions to ask him.
Please, sir.
See, the first is before surgery. Okay, the diagnosis is lupus vulgaris, tuberculosis. Okay,
Yes, sir.
if it is tuberculosis, you would have attempted try to heal the wound with anti-tubercular drug rather than going for surgery. Okay, that is the first thing what he has done, which is looking bit unscientifical. That is one. And second is, even if you are planning for surgery, you would have taken the on-table frozen section and you would have confirmed the tissue diagnosis. Okay, at the same time, you would have called the plastic surgeon for the primary reconstruction of the penis because the man is still 49 years old. Okay, so they
Yes,
are
sir.
the two things I want you to clarify, doctor. Why did you approach this case without knowing the biopsy? Okay, that
No,
is
sir.
one.
The biopsy was done in the November, sir. In the November month, the patient has come to us in December.
See, whatever may be, no. So before taking him for surgery, you would have gone for a histopathological confirmation. Without that, you cannot operate this case. Okay, I told you, no. That is one. And second is the way even if you are planning for a surgery, you would have taken the frozen section on table confirmation of the malignancy. Then whatever the penectomy you have done, at the same time, you would have called the plastic surgeon for the reconstruction, penile reconstruction.
Sir,
Considering
by the time the patient
is
has, yes, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
but by the time the patient has come, there is an auto amputation of penis shaft is noted, sir. And and we cannot, and the plastic surgeon also have told that this reconstruction is not possible, and the patient is also okay with it.
There is one question from Dr. Ravi Shankar, sir, from the chat box. He wants to know with regards to the status of inguinal lymph node dissection.
No, sir. Inguinal lymph nodes were not palpable, sir, and ultrasound also didn't get it detected. So we didn't follow it up. We didn't do the lymph node dissection. And
What
one
about-
more, sir.
Yeah, please continue.
This case, while we are operating, we have considered it only as a lupus vulgaris, but not as an but not as a carcinomatous case.
Lupus
If it
vulgaris.
would not present with such extensive, it will have its own features also, right? Tubercular lupus vulgaris, which happens on the face and other areas also.
Yes, sir.
Okay, anyway, you
We're
have
running out of time,
emergency
sir.
to do, but at least what about the lungs? What happened to the lungs? Lungs or
Sir,
other?
lungs are normal, sir.
Okay. On the CT scan or X-ray?
On the X-ray, sir. We didn't get a CT scan done.
Okay.
Later you have to follow up for inguinal nodes and lungs. Okay.
Sure. Yes.
I think other questions can be posted in the chat box.
Yes.
Before the next, it's okay, judges?
It's okay, it's okay. It's okay, sir. You're covered.
Yeah, before you go to the next thing, I think somebody else can load. Dr. Khan, please mention the next person's name, please.
Thank you.
We have our next presenter from Vaidehi. It is Dr. Priyanka RK, who is doing an e-poster on a giant parathyroid adenoma.
Before Dr. Priyanka starts, I would like to add two things. Don't say good evening, good afternoon on for surgeons or HOD and other things. So please start off because there is limited time for you, 3 minutes. One. Second is when you take photographs which you are going to present, please clean up the whole area, clean up the blood, put fresh sheets, a green towel or blue sheets, whatever paper sheets, whatever you want to clean up the area so that it looks aesthetic on photography. Because if you want to publish in journal, they may not accept if your photographs are not good. Okay.
Good
Please start.
evening, I'm Priyanka. I'd like to thank Surgical Society Bangalore and our professor and HOD, Dr. Ramesh Reddy sir, for giving me this opportunity to present.
You have 3 minutes. Please start with the topic.
Giant parathyroid adenoma. A 46-year-old lady presented with bilateral pain and worsening bilateral hip pain since 2 years. She had anorexia, epigastric pain, weight loss, and generalized weakness in 6 months. She underwent left URSM and open cholecystectomy in the past. She had no comorbidities and there was no significant family history. She was a middle-aged lady with a normal pulse and BP. She had pallor. Neck examination revealed a solid swelling of 3 to 3 centimeters in the right thyroid region, which was moving with deglutition. There was no lymphadenopathy. She had tenderness at the anterior joint line of the right hip with thigh flexor power being 4/5. Abdominal examination revealed a healed right subcostal scar and mild epigastric tenderness. Other systems were unremarkable. On investigating, hemoglobin was found to be low. Serum calcium was persistently elevated. ALP was elevated. Parathormone was 2,600. This persistently elevated serum calcium and very high parathormone suggested the patient has primary hyperparathyroidism, probably due to parathyroid tumor. Neck ultrasound was performed, which showed a lesion in the right thyroid lobe. System EV scan suggested a right inferior parathyroid adenoma. CT neck showed a nodule indenting the right thyroid lobe. X-ray right hip showed an impending fracture of the femoral neck. The skull X-ray and hand X-ray revealed subperiosteal bone resorption. Patient was initially admitted under general medicine. Anemia was corrected and calcium was brought under control. Patient was then transferred to general surgery for further management. Neck exploration under general anesthesia was performed. Intraoperatively, there was a solitary parathyroid tumor measuring 3.5 to 3.5 centimeters, adherent to the lower pole of the right lobe of thyroid. Thyroid and other parathyroid glands were normal. There was no lymphadenopathy. Patient underwent right hemithyroidectomy with excision of right inferior parathyroid tumor. We performed a parathyroid hormone assay intraoperatively, which showed 93% decrease 10 minutes post-excision. There was 99% decrease 48 hours post-operatively. Serum calcium was monitored and a patient developed hypocalcemia, for which she was given repeated calcium infusions. Biopsy report showed right inferior parathyroid gland lesion weighing 3.6 gram. The features were suggestive of parathyroid adenoma. There was no capsular or vascular invasion and the thyroid was normal. She underwent a prophylactic proximal femoral nailing for an impending fracture of the right femoral neck. Patient was able to walk with support following this. The neck wound healed well. The normal parathyroid glands weigh approximately 30 milligram. Parathyroid adenomas are usually small, measuring less than 2 centimeters and weigh less than 1 gram. They present with primary hyperparathyroidism. Giant parathyroid adenomas are rare and only 22 such cases have been reported in literature. Indian patients with primary hyperparathyroidism present at a younger age. System EB scan is 95% accurate and sensitive in localizing the adenomas. Ultrasound and CT neck is usually to assess the exact site, size, and surrounding structures. To conclude, our giant parathyroid adenoma case is unusual since it presented with a palpable right-sided neck mass, which was so large that the initial ultrasound suggested it could be a thyroid nodule. Our case also had the classical presentation of parathyroid adenoma, that is recurrent kidney stones, bone, and gastrointestinal symptoms. The intraoperative parathyroid hormone assay showed 93% decrease in the levels, suggesting that it is a parathyroid adenoma. Our tumor weighed 3.6 gram, which well falls in the criteria of a giant parathyroid adenoma, that is 3.5 gram. Histopathological examination also ruled out malignancy. These are my references.
Poster is open.
Good, yeah, good talk, good presentation. What are the 4 classical presentation of this thing, parathyroid, hyperparathyroidism?
Sir, the serum calcium is elevated, sir. RFT is
4 classical symptoms. What are the symptoms?
The abdominal
clinical.
symptoms, bone pains, abdominal symptoms.
Bones means bone pain. Okay, next.
Pains, abdominal groans. Abdominal pains.
Groans. Why does abdominal groans happen?
Sir, a patient can have either recurring kidney stones or in our case, calcific pancreatitis was present.
Those
So,
two reasons, bones, groans, then
psychiatric moans.
stones, kidney stones,
Yes.
bones, stones, groans, abdominal
And
groans,
psychiatric
and
moans.
psychiatric moans. If patient has any of these symptoms, good that your physician did a calcium. Many times it is missed out. Sometimes patients are crippled, fractures. She had impending fracture, pancreatitis, or kidney failure also we have seen. So always when in doubt, do a serum calcium. What if your patient was not fit for GA? Many times psychiatric problems, all those things, no kidney failure if they are in.
Sir, since our patient had hypercalcemia, the control of hypercalcemia could have been continued. That is well
Patient is
hydration.
not fit for GA because of kidney failure or psychiatric problems as a secondary to parathyroidism. You could have done the surgery under local anesthesia also. There is something called as cervical block, okay, or local infiltration also. We have done. It is possible. It can be done. It can be done like a node biopsy, okay. What was that parathyroid test that you did? What is the test called? It's in PTH test during surgery.
Sir, intraoperative parathyroid hormone assay we
PIC,
performed.
yeah, it's called PIC parathyroid hormone assay or intraoperative assay. When it is done, and what is the value drop, minimum drop that you expect?
Sir, just before incision, we performed, we drew a sample and the levels came as 3000, sir. And
Yes.
soon after excision, that
Before
is 10
incision or
minutes.
even before the breaking the patient for anesthesia, you can always do that. Difference doesn't matter much because there is intact tumor. Okay, right.
One question from the chat box.
No,
from
still she is
Ram-
not finished.
Sir.
Still she is not finished. When do you
Sorry, sir.
take the assay intraoperatively? How many minutes later?
So 10 minutes later, so 10 minutes
15
post excision.
15 minutes post excision you take it, and what is the value that drop that you expect?
Sir, it should drop down to normal range or
No, it won't drop to normal range so early.
It will drop.
If you take
Or
it at
half.
15 minutes, it will drop to more than half.
more than half.
Because the PTH half-life is 3 minutes. Okay. Right? If you do you know any types of hyperparathyroidism?
So primary hyperparathyroidism, secondary hyperparathyroidism, sir. Primary is in the setting of a normal renal function test.
Primary
Secondary
means there is PTH is high
PTH is
because of a tumor in the parathyroid, whatever is the tumor. Okay. Secondary means
so, usually because of a kidney disorder where the calcium levels will be
vitamin D levels are
will
low.
be-
So calcium will be low. Then there is secondary hyperparathyroidism. What is tertiary? That is receptor level problem. Okay. Tertiary hyperparathyroidism is a problem at the receptor level, calcium receptor level. Any questions? Next, please.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. Just, it's my kind request to judges and Dr. Khan. We are, reached the time of the posters. We have just completed the 4 posters. 5 posters yet to be completed. I think if we go in this space, we will complete the session by 10 o'clock. I request the judges, Dr. Lokesh sir and Dr.
Yeah,
Khan coordinate.
Okay.
We'll fix to the time for the discussion and the paper, please.
Okay. Dr. Priyanka, there are a few questions in chat box. Just answer that question and you can. Why people have asked why there is hemithyroidectomy and not only adenoma excision.
Sir, in our case, we hadn't ruled out malignancy, sir. We were thinking in terms of just a tumor, and we weren't sure whether it was malignancy or an adenoma. So to be on the safer side, we went ahead with the right hemithyroidectomy. And
Did you
also the
consider
tumor was-
on-table frozen section?
no, sir. And also the tumor was adherent to the lower pole of our thyroid lobe. There was no definite plane between the adenoma and the thyroid.
If your preoperative calcium is more than 14, that's the hyper malignancy as the reason. One way.
Okay, can we move on to the next presenter, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes.
We have our next presenter from Vaidehi, Dr. Raksha. She will be doing a e-poster on surgically cured secondary hypertension.
Good evening, everyone. My poster topic, surgically cured secondary hypertension and unusual paraganglioma. Introduction. Paragangliomas are rare non-epithelial neuroendocrine tumors that arise from the chromaffin cells in the paraganglia. Sympathetic paraganglias are located predominantly in the adrenals and organ of Zuckerkandl. Incidence ranges from 2 to 8 per million per year, and about 0.1% of the hypertensive patients have a pheochromocytoma or a paraganglioma. Most common age group 30 to 50 years. A 29-year-old lady presented to us with a history of intermittent headache since 1 year, episodic excessive sweating and palpitation since 2 months. On examination, patient's BP was 160 by 100 mmHg. Systemic examination were normal, no significant family history. On follow-up, patient had sustained hypertension and the cause for secondary hypertension was evaluated. From the investigations, we got raised plasma-free norepinephrine level, plasma renin direct and serum aldosterone levels. Aldosterone renin ratio was low and patient had hypokalemia. CT scan showed enhancing lesion with the central necrotic patch in the L2-L3 level in the para-aortic region, compressing the right renal artery. There was shrunken right kidney with the compensatory hypertrophy of the left kidney. Gallium-68 Duttonite scan showed somatostatin uptake in the mass with no obvious metastatic disease. Diagnosis, a functional interaortocaval paraganglioma with right renal artery stenosis and secondary hyperaldosteronism. Patient was started initially on an alpha blocker, calcium channel blocker.
Some problem with the, hello, some
Hello.
problem with volume.
I think it got disconnected.
Since
Boy,
at Jain Hospital, it got disconnected probably.
Harish,
Yes, sir.
while we are waiting, we can ask Dr. Venkat to talk about the need for block dissection in that.
Hello, sir.
sequence
Sorry for the
that was
interruption.
described.
Hello.
Because
Sir, there's
I
some
think it is
technical
important
issue
that the
which we are
students
fixing
know
it.
about it.
Yes, sir. Dr. Venkat, sir.
Ah, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Connect ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ
They're not able to do it.
Sir, we are connecting, sir. One second. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello?
No, I am not the host, sir.
Ah. Okay. Sir,
No.
there is an interruption in the connection.
If there is delay, we can move on to Ambedkar College and come back to them later.
ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಒಂದೇ ಕಡೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
ಹೌದಾ ಸರ್?
ಇರ್ಬೇಕು. All both are in the same venue.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Speaker, speaker, you have to. Last. Internet है या नहीं है?
Yes. Hello, sir. So there's some technical issues which we are running through. We are on the mode to correct it. Hello, sir.
Harish?
Yes, sir.
With your permission, can I take this opportunity to speak to the surgical fraternity? Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Ravi Shankar from Sagar Hospital. I would solicit your presence in the next surgical society meeting. It is on the 14th of next month. And I would cordially invite all of you. It is difficult times of COVID. I think it is just coming. We are coming out of it. So, I don't think we can do it in person. So I sincerely request all of you to please attend the next surgical society meeting, which is on the 14th of July. Thank you.
Harish, announcements ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಂಗಿದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡಿ.
The other thing is, the coming Saturday, we have the Surgical Society of Bangalore is organizing a subject seminar and discussion on perioperative blood management. So it is an extremely important topic. I would request all the postgraduates and even the Surgical Society Karnataka State Chapter, everybody should attend it because it's a very important topic. There are three eminent panelists, Dr. Kalaivani, Professor of Surgery from MS Ramaya, Dr. Shivram, who is the head of the Department of Transfusion Medicine at Manipal Hospital, and Dr. Arun, who is the head of the Department of Anesthesia at Aster. So I will be moderating the thing. The plan is to have about 12 questions primarily, and at every question I would request the participation of the audience. And the panelists will initially talk about it, and then I will show the evidence base for what has been done, what is currently being done. And I think the panelists and also the audience should be actively involved. So it is an extremely important topic, and I would request a major participation from the postgraduates and the surgeons. Thank you. Harish, kindly add to that if you please.
Yes, sir. So with the continuation of the announcements, so we are celebrating Surgeons Day on 26th June on a virtual platform. So I request all the fraternity of the Surgical Society Bangalore to participate in a good number to make it the program a successful one. I request all the senior surgeons and all the consultants of the Bangalore and all the hospital surgeons to be a part of the program. So the next monthly clinical meeting is on Wednesday, 14th July. So hosted by Sagar Hospital, as Dr. Ravi Shankar already discussed. So I request all the participants to participate in a good number for the next coming night CME, that is on perioperative blood transfusion.
ಆಯ್ತಾ connect?
ಇಲ್ಲ sir. Now I think
that's hard to make. Sir, 2 minutes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, just 2 minutes. It's there, getting connected.
Yeah.
Please educate the students about the need of inguinal block dissection in patients with carcinoma penis. I think this is a fairly extensive tumor coming to the base. I think there is definitely role for even prophylactic inguinal block dissection.
This was done as an emergency. Adhikoskara, they have done this procedure, but same time we don't prefer to do inguinal node dissection. Probably 3 weeks later, this patient, after the pathology report is looked into, after a course of antibiotics.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can. Just share the screen and please proceed.
I think no, I can give a talk on inguinal node dissection for the surgery, which is another day.
With Dr. Rakshala.
Sir. Harish, sir.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Nodi, sir, screen share.
Now I think you can share the screen. Yeah, please.
We'll start from beginning. Start from here.
full screen.
Sorry for the technical issues. We are ready to go.
Yes, sir. Full screen ಮಾಡಿ Dr. Khan.
Good evening, everyone. My poster
Yeah,
topic,
magnify this.
surgically cured secondary hypertension and unusual paraganglioma. Introduction. Paragangliomas are rare non-epithelial neuroendocrine tumors that arise from the chromaffin cells in the paraganglia. Sympathetic paraganglias are usually located in the adrenals and organ of Zuckerkandl. Incidence ranges from 2 to 8 per million per year, and about 0.1% of the hypertensive patients harbor a pheochromocytoma or a paraganglioma. Most common age group 30 to 50 years. A 29-year-old lady presented to us with the history of intermittent headache since 1 year, episodic excessive sweating, and palpitations since 2 months. On examination, patient's BP was 160 by 100 mmHg. Systemic examination were normal, no significant family history. On follow-up, patient had sustained hypertension. The cause for the secondary hypertension was evaluated. From the investigation, we got raised plasma-free normetanephrine, plasma renin direct, and serum aldosterone level. Aldosterone renin ratio was low, and patient had hypokalemia. There was hypervascular centrally necrotic lesion in the L2, L3 level in the para-aortic region, compressing the right renal artery, causing shrunken right kidney with compensatory hypertrophy of the left kidney. Gallium-68 Dotonic scan showed somatostatin uptake in the mass with no obvious metastatic disease. Diagnosis: a functional interaortocaval paraganglioma with right renal artery stenosis and secondary hyperaldosteronism. Treatment: patient was started initially on an alpha blocker, calcium channel blocker, and a beta blocker were added on later. Blood pressure was optimized, and hypokalemia interaortocaval groove, abutting the adjacent structure. The feeder vessels were identified and complete excision of the two suggesting benign. Follow-up after 1 month, patient was asymptomatic with normal blood pressure. Plasma-free normetanephrine and metanephrines were normal. Discussion: most of the sympathetic paragangliomas are functional tumors secreting excess with paragangliomas have inherited condition with germline mutations. Associated syndromes with MEN2A, 2B, von Hippel-Lindau, and neurofibromatosis 1. 5 to 10% of the paragangliomas are malignant. Malignancy here is defined as presence of chromaffin tissue in the non-chromaffin organs such as lymph node, liver, lungs, and bone. Following complete resection of the tumor, the risk of new tumoral events were higher for patients with genetic or syndromic diseases. Radioisotope labeled somatostatin analogs can be utilized for both tumor localization and peptide radionuclide therapy, which is still under clinical trials. To conclude, it's important to identify the coexistence of renal artery stenosis with paragangliomas. A holistic approach is important to properly structure a management plan. Family history is important, and we should look for the clinical features of associated genetic syndromes. Proper preoperative preparation, meticulous handling of the tumor during surgery, and long-term follow-up is required. These are my references. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Lokesh.
Yeah. Immunohistochemistry was done. Post pathology.
Dr. Lokesh.
Yeah. Am I audible? Hello.
So can you hear us, Dr. Lokesh?
Yes. Yes. Am I audible? Hello.
Please ask your question.
Any immunohistochemical analysis done for this patient?
Dr. Khan.
So Dr. Lokesh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I am asking any immunohistochemistry analysis done for this patient? Hello.
Just a minute, sir. Just a minute.
All patients ಇವರಿಗೆನಾ?
Any IHC done? What happens? Any IHC done? There is a question you're asking.
No, sir. IHC was not done. The histopathological examination showed PAS score of 2 suggesting benign.
But usually these swellings, they are well known for their.
Can't hear.
Hello.
You can speak, answer the questions.
I'm not able to hear, sir. There's some technical issue.
Hello.
ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ನೀವು
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲಂತೆ. So they are parallelly preparing for one more system.
Hello.
Please answer the questions.
Yes.
No, just answer.
Questions.
What was the question, sir? Can you
Question,
please
sir?
repeat the question? There was some technical issue.
Yeah, that's what, sir. I asked whether did they do any immunohistochemistry analysis for the specimen.
No, sir. We could have gone for the chromatogranin or the synaptophysin IHC panel. We didn't go ahead with it. The PASCO was suggesting of benign features. We didn't do IHC panels.
What shows malignant? What proves that this tumor is malignant in neuroendocrine tumor?
Sir, here malignancy we couldn't assess by the the tumor invasion or the presence of the chromaffin. The presence of the chromaffin tissue in a non-chromaffin organ such as lymph node, liver, or bones will be suggestive of malignancy. Unlike other
neuroendocrine tumor proves that it is malignant.
Sir?
Any other questions?
I think there is a question in chat box.
Please answer that. Any other question?
Yeah, there's one question in the chat box.
According to the topic heading, can hypertension be cured?
Yes, sir. The secondary hypertension can be cured. In our case, the operative cure here is defined as the normotensive patient after the surgery, and with in case of a functional tumor, the normal metanephrine and normetanephrine levels suggest that it is cured. So yes, sir, it is curable.
What do you do in renal artery stenosis?
So here the kidney functions are normal. So after excision of the tumor, the renal function would, if at all there was some derangements, it would improve. So if there is any more than 70% of the stenosis which is there, then we can go ahead with the nephrectomy.
Anything else possible for stenosis other than nephrectomy?
So stenting can be done. If there is any atherosclerotic cause or fibromuscular dysplasia, then we can go ahead with the stenting.
If you have treated the primary thing, it won't likely to recur. So something can be done for the renal artery problem. Okay.
Yes.
So we'll move on to the next presenter.
Yeah,
we have Dr. Kumar Mayam from Vaidehi. He will be doing a e-poster presentation on AV malformation of abdominal wall, presenting as chronic abdominal pain. Yeah, Vaidehi. Mayam.
This screen is minimized. Can you magnify that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll do it.
You can proceed in the meanwhile.
Is this fine, sir?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My poster is a case of arteriovenous malformation over anterior abdominal wall. Case summary: 15-year-old female. She came with chief complaints of pain abdomen since 1 year on and off, with no aggravating factors. For similar complaints in the past, patient had undergone appendicectomy and ovarian cystectomy, but still her symptoms had not resolved. She had attained menarche at 12 years of age. There was no menstrual irregularities. On examination, vitals were stable. Per abdomen, she had a healed scar at the McBurney's point and ovarian cystectomy scar in the suprapubic region. There was tenderness in the hypogastric and the suprapubic region. There was no palpable mass. There was no cough impulse. Other systems were normal. Routine blood investigations were within normal limit, and urine culture and sensitivity, there was no growth. Ultrasound abdomen pelvis was done, which showed a cystic lesion 16 to 7 mm in the midline, plane deeper to the rectus abdominis muscle in the hypogastric region. Probe tenderness was noted, suggestive of a urethral cyst. CCT abdomen and pelvis was done, which showed normal study. Patient was treated conservatively initially, but symptoms did not subside. So we went ahead with exploration. In the intra-op findings, there was a 0.5 into 0.5 centimeter calcified lesion noted below the rectus muscle, approximately 7 centimeter below the umbilicus. The lesion was excised and sent for histopathology. Also, there was a left ovarian cyst noted, and cystectomy was done for that. Right ovary and fallopian tubes could not be visualized, and peritoneum and omental tissue bits were taken and sent for histopathology, and there was no other significant intra-abdominal findings. Post-operatively, there was a significant improvement in the patient's symptoms, and she didn't complain further of pain abdomen. The histopathology report came, which suggested dense fibrocollagenous tissue with adipose tissue with areas of hemorrhage, aggregates of inflammatory cells, along with multiple thin and thick-walled blood vessels. There were no granulomas or malignancies. Omentum and peritoneum were unremarkable. And finally, the impression, it was suggestive of arteriovenous malformation. These are the microscopic pictures. There are multiple thin and thick-walled blood vessels. There are areas of hemorrhages and dense adipose and fibrocollagenous tissue. Coming to discussion, vascular malformations, they are localized defects of morphogenesis and embryogenesis and vasculogenesis. They're classified basically into hemangiomas and vascular malformations. Malformations can be further classified into low or slow flow malformations and high and fast flow malformations. Examples of low flow are capillary, venous, and lymphatic malformations, and high are arterial malformation, arteriovenous fistulas, arteriovenous malformations, and complex combined vascular malformations. They are commonly seen in head and neck extremities, and they affect the trunk, and they present as easily compressible blue masses. There are only a few cases reported regarding AVM of the anterior abdominal wall, and majority of the patients, they will present with the typical clinical features. And depending on the size, stage, and symptoms, they can be treated conservatively, sclerotherapy or embolization with or without surgery, or with surgery alone. And the most effective treatment is transarterial embolization. Coming to conclusion, AVM of anterior abdominal wall is rare, and imaging studies help in diagnosis, especially with patients with atypical clinical features. And it should be kept as a differential diagnosis in young patients with long-standing abdominal wall lump. CT and MRI are useful modalities to diagnose and classify this entity, and therapeutic embolization followed by surgical excision is the best treatment for resectable arteriovenous malformations. These are my references.
Poster is open for discussion.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. We
Hello.
can hear you. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
And Dr. Khan and Dr. Mahesh.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
It's a nice presentation. Okay, doctor, you are telling. Hello, doctor, you are telling it is AV malformation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, low flow AV malformation. Okay, so what could be the embryogenesis? What could be the possible embryogenesis of this AV malformation? How the AV malformation? Yeah, tell me.
It can be due to endothelial proliferations.
No, see, we are going to classify into hemangioma and AV malformations.
Yes,
Hemangioma and malformations. Okay, so hemangioma most of the time gradually it will proliferative, and gradually it will subside, it will regress.
Yes.
Whereas
Yes,
malformation gradually it will increase and it will persist for longer time. The
Yes,
malformation, the etiology is presence of dysplastic, sequestrated dysplastic vessels from the main embryological vascular stream. Okay.
Yes,
So, the lesion over the lower abdominal wall is very, very rare. And also your histopathology, what you have showed, is showing some of the hemorrhagic spots and some endothelial cells. This presence of some endothelial cells. That's it. But you need to confirm it. You have to go for higher investigations like electron microscopy. Got it? Okay, so what I am thinking is it is looking more of the hematoma going for some secondary changes. Okay, it is not a AV malformation. Got it?
Yes.
Understood? Yeah.
Lokesh,
Yeah.
sir, any more questions? for
Hello,
us, sir?
Dr. Venkatesh here.
Ready, Bharat.
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Dr. Venkatesh Reddy. Yeah, just is nice, good presentation. But thing is, see, any AV malformation can be whether it's abdominal, intra-abdominal, extra-abdominal wall, anywhere. It can easily picked up in the CT scans, especially CT contrast scan.
Yes.
But
The
your
CT scan was
CT scan you mentioned is a
Normal.
normal.
Yeah. Ultrasound is
So this
showing, but CT
unlikely
is
is a
normal.
vascular malformation.
Yeah.
Yes.
It
And
looks like some
clinically also,
Yes.
and clinically also, AV malformation clinically can feel that the thrill or bruise and all.
Yes. So typical symptoms were not this. That's
So
why
we are
it's-
running out of
But is
time. We are running
definitely
out of time, sir.
CECT is the can be easily picked up CECT,
Yes.
the contrast one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sir,
Thank you,
and
sir.
geography would have
We are
been.
running out of time.
Okay,
We
next.
have the next presenter.
Questions can be asked in the chat box.
We have our next presenter, Dr. Hamsa Priya from Ambedkar Medical College. She will be doing a e-poster on Lily's procedure for giant cerebral cyst in an adult.
आपने पता है मुझे एक बार बोला कि बैंक का सोसाइटी it is going ठीक है वैसे ही और बिहार
Good evening, everyone. I'm presenting the poster on Lily's procedure for giant colorectal cyst in an adult. A 46-year-old female presented with the complaints of mass per abdomen and pain abdomen since 2 years. On per-abdominal examination, palpable mass was noted in the right side of abdomen, crossing the midline and extending down to pelvic brim. A routine investigations revealed increase in total count and her LFT was mildly deranged. USG abdomen and pelvis showed huge colorectal cyst with intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation and a CT abdomen pelvis wall. Large thick wall cystic lesion in the subhepatic region measuring about 10 into 14 into 12 centimeters, extending into pancreatic head caudally and cystic duct and common hepatic duct cranially. There was moderate to severe intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation, which is suggestive of type 4A cyst. MRCP revealed large cystic structure arising from the proximal CBD, measuring about 10 into 14 into 12 centimeter with intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation. Our surgery plan was cyst excision with hepaticojejunostomy. Cyst was approached through the right subcostal incision. There was dense adhesions noted all over due to the chronic recurrent inflammation, and the duodenum was mobilized and the retrograde dissection of the gallbladder was done. Cyst was confirmed by aspiration. About 1.5 liter of bile was aspirated out. Due to the dense pericystic adhesions, the cyst was opened and the common hepatic duct opening and the cystic duct opening was identified from the inside of the cyst wall. We could able to dissect the common hepatic duct all over and it was hooked with an artery. Due to long-standing inflammation, the cyst wall was densely adhered to the portal structures, so it was inseparable. So only the mucosa of the cyst was excised, leaving behind the fibrous wall. This is Lily's technique. This is the plane between the mucosa and the fibrous wall. Mucosa is being stripped off. Entire mucosa was stripped off in a single piece from the fibrous wall. Biliary confluence was identified and it was dissected till the bifurcation of the right and left hepatic duct. In the retroduodenal portion of the cyst, after the mucosal excision, the opening of the cyst into a pancreatic duct was noted and later it was closed. Reconstruction was done by Rowe-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. The specimen was sent for histopath. It showed largely ulcerated epithelium and the residual viable epithelium showed mild to moderate atypia and tightly nodular aggregates which are micropapillary. There was no invasive component and the cystic duct margin was negative for tumor. Impression was biliary intraepithelial neoplasia type 2 with choledochal cyst and the gallbladder showed chronic cholecystitis. Our post-op period was uneventful and the drain was removed on the 9th day. The patient is being followed for 2 months and she is doing well. Coming to discussion, choledochal cyst are congenital cystic dilatations of extra or intrahepatic biliary or both. 20% of these cysts are diagnosed in the adulthood. When they present in adulthood, due to long-standing chronic inflammation, cyst adheres densely to the portal vein and hepatic artery. The separation of the cyst from portal structure is difficult. So instead of injuring to the portal structures, Lilly's technique can be followed. When complete full thickness excision of the cyst is not possible, the fibrous wall of the duct is left adhering to the portal vein or hepatic artery, while the mucosa of the cyst wall is completely excised. This removes the risk of malignant transformation in that segment of the duct. These are my references.
Poster is open for discussion. Lokesh sir. Hello, Dr. Lokesh.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Dr.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It was there.
Doctor, what is your plan for follow-up in this patient?
So,
Sir, can you please repeat the question? She couldn't hear, sir.
Plan of follow-up in this patient.
Sir, patient is followed for 2 months. She is asymptomatic, and after 6 months, we are planning to do CT scans.
No, you should explain the rationale behind that for your friends, postgraduates.
Nothing was done, sir.
So there was intrahepatic biliary compressions after removal of the periductal cyst as extrahepatic. Because
No.
there was intrahepatic cyst also which is
Yes,
compressing.
sir. But there was no stricture in between the dilatations. So it may be due to the increased interluminal pressure of the extrahepatic duct. After the drainage of the cyst may be relieved. After 6 months, we'll.
Probably you might need the data. Compression. PTB. One question from the chat box from Prakash sir. He wants to know with regards to post-operative complications. If there are any post-operative complications.
There was no post-op complications in this cases. Sir. Usually, early post-op complications will be anastomotic leak or intestinal obstruction and cholangitis. The late complications can be anastomotic stricture.
Lakshman sir has asked the same thing. If there are any long-term complications, what do you expect?
There can be malignant transformations if the mucosa of the cyst was any left behind.
Last question. What is the theory?
Thank you, doctor. We'll move on to next.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have our next presenter, Dr. Manish from Ambedkar Medical College, who will be doing a e-poster presentation on a rare case of duplex gallbladder.
Duplex gallbladder with diffuse wall thickening and tiny calculus, bulky pancreas with focal lesion anterior to the head. These are the images of MRI abdomen and MRCP. MRI abdomen revealed duplication of gallbladder with a tiny calculi in the lumen with no choledocholitis and biliary dilatation, and features are inconsistent with acute edematous pancreatitis with no localized lesion. This is the duplication of gallbladder we can appreciate in MRI abdomen and MRCP. This patient underwent a standard 4-port laparoscopic cholecystectomy. While we were trying to achieve a critical view of safety, we could encounter 2 cystic ducts. As we can see, the first cystic duct is cut and separated here. Similarly, the second cystic duct clips will be placed to the cystic duct and cystic artery respectively and divided between the clips. And the gallbladder will be dissected from the gallbladder fossa and retrieved by the was dissected from the gallbladder fossa and was retrieved by the umbilical port. This is the specimen, post-operative specimen. We can appreciate the first cystic duct and the second cystic duct here with a common wall. Histopath examination revealed chronic cholecystitis. This duplex gallbladder is a rare congenital abnormality with an incidence of 1 in 34,000. Duplex gallbladder occur when either the cystic primordium splits during the 5th to 6th week of embryogenesis to give a duplicate gallbladder, or when there is an extra budding of the biliary primordium to give rise to an accessory gallbladder. The types of gallbladder classification can be done by its relation to the cystic duct. The first type is split primordium group, where there'll be one cystic duct with two gallbladder. The subtypes are septate, V-shaped, and Y-shaped. The second type is accessory gallbladder group. The subtypes are H type and trabecular type. Here there'll be two cystic duct and two gallbladder. Our case was H type of accessory gallbladder. Patient with duplex gallbladder can either be asymptomatic or symptomatic. If symptomatic, they can present with biliary colic, cholecystitis, cholangitis, or pancreatitis. Differential diagnosis include Phrygian cap, choledochal cyst, folded gallbladder, gallbladder diverticulum, and intraperitoneal fibrous branch. Ultrasound scan is the first line of investigation in assessing gallstones, cholecystitis, gallbladder anatomical abnormalities. MRCP is superior to ultrasound scan for anatomical evaluation of the biliary tree. Missed diagnosis can lead to intraoperative injuries or representing of patients with biliary symptoms. Therefore, defining the anatomy of biliary tree is crucial at preoperative stage and during the intraoperative stage, by achieving a critical view of safety as it enables the surgeon to reduce the risk of complication from biliary and vascular injuries. Conclusion. Duplex gallbladder are a rare congenital abnormality. Surgery is only indicated for symptomatic duplex gallbladder, and laparoscopic cholecystectomy is a mode of treatment. Ultrasound scan is the first line of investigation, but condition like duplex gallbladder can be missed in ultrasound scan and it can be intraoperative surprise. Hence, achieving a critical view of safety is of utmost important to prevent intraoperative injuries during laparoscopic cholecystectomy. These are my references. Thank you.
Poster is open for discussion.
Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Doctor, supposedly by your preoperative evaluation, only one gallbladder is affected. There is a stone in one gallbladder and the other gallbladder is fine. Are you going to remove both, or you are going to remove one because the other is fine?
So we will remove both the gallbladders.
Okay. And there are a few questions in chat box, it seems.
One question from Lakshman, sir. Please explain what critical view of safety is.
Critical view of safety is only two structures should be entering the gallbladder, that is cystic duct and cystic artery, before doing the dissection. Here we'll make sure the hepatocystic triangle is clear of fat and fibrous tissue, and the gallbladder, lower third of gallbladder will be separated from the liver bed, and we'll make sure that we don't injure any other structures during the procedure.
One last question from Prakash, sir. Why ICG imaging was not done in this case? It's very helpful, though. How do you justify?
Availability, it is not in our hospital. We don't have the availability of it. Right.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next presenter, sir?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. Visha Shetty, who will be doing the e-poster presentation on a rare case of giant aegis of wild variant.
Good evening, everyone. The poster today presented is a rare case of giant extra gastrointestinal stromal tumor of wild variant. 80-year-old female, known case of diabetes mellitus on treatment, presented with complaints of distension of abdomen since 4 weeks. It was associated with pain in right iliac fossa, insidious in onset, gradually progressive in nature, associated with occasional constipation, breathlessness on lying down, relieved on lying down on sides, weight loss of about 5 kgs, and increased frequency of micturition. On examination, a solid mobile mass was noted to be extending from right half of abdomen to involve almost whole of left half of abdomen. The mass was mobile in horizontal direction. Per rectal examination was normal. Bilateral lower limb edema was present. USG was suggestive of a fairly lobular heterogeneous lesion located in the peritoneal cavity, measuring about 37 by 20 centimeters. It extended from the epigastrium to the pelvic cavity inferiorly, on either side to the lumbar region with prominent internal vascularity. The CECT findings were similar to that of the USG, with the liver, spleen, and other pelvic structures being normal. Thus, the features were suggestive of intraperitoneal neoplastic etiology. Intraoperatively, the tumor was noted to be arising from the mesentery, with the ileum and cecum noted to be stretched over the tumor, weighing about 6 kgs, measuring 32 by 24 by 15 centimeters. The patient underwent exploratory laparotomy with R0 resection with end jejunostomy since the patient was hemodynamically unstable. This is the tumor that is being resected. Here is a resected specimen of tumor with a specimen of excised ileum that is noted to be stretched over the tumor. Histopathologically, it was noted to be of mixed variant, that is both the epithelioid and the spindle cell type, mitotic rate being more than 5 by 5 millimeter square, high grade, high risk, TNM staging being PT4N0M0. Thus, the features were suggestive of high grade mixed type gastrointestinal stromal tumor. Immunohistochemistry was negative for c-KIT, DOG1, and PDGFRA markers. She was being followed up for 2 months and she was planning to be started on sunitinib along with closure of stoma after COVID. But the above plan was not carried out as the patient passed away in her sleep at her residence. GIST is the most common mesenchymal tumor of the alimentary canal. It accounts for about 3% of all gastrointestinal tumor and 3 to 5% of all sarcomas. Most commonly, they arise from stomach, that is 56%, followed by small intestine, colon, rectum, least common being the esophagus. Mesenteric GIST constitute less than 5%. The largest GIST ever recorded in literature weighed 18.5 kgs and measured 42 by 31 by 23 centimeters. About 85% of GIST are reported to have an activating mutation in KIT or PDGFRA genes, CD117 being the diagnostic marker. A small proportion, that is the wild type, is negative for both KIT and PDGFRA genes and may harbor mutation for the BRAF and KRAS genes, which are usually seen to involve the mesentery or the omentum. 3 main histological subtypes are noted, spindle cell type being the most common, followed by the epithelioid and mixed spindle and epithelioid type. Symptoms depend on the location. Management is usually CT or MRI and endoscopic examination. Treatment is surgical and followed by adjuvant therapy, which is imatinib, that's a standard line, followed by sunitinib and regorafenib. These are my references.
Lokesh, sir, you have any questions?
Hello, doctor. Is there any difference in the management of E-GIST or GIST?
As such, no, sir. The size of the GIST is actually what matters in the treatment.
Okay. Then will there be any change in the outcome?
Yes, sir. If the size, especially if it is in the gastric location, usually less than 2 centimeters, they usually have lesser chances of recurrence. So we can wait and watch these patients, but other patients usually require imatinib, and those with larger tumors, the size being more than 10 centimeter, they have about 50% recurrence. So then again, imatinib would be like lifelong therapy with imatinib would be advised in these patients.
There is a question in chat box. Why didn't you consider neoadjuvant therapy in this case?
Sir, obstruction was there, sir, for this patient. That's why. Initially, she presented with obstruction and breathlessness. That's why we decided to take the patient up immediately for surgery.
What do you know the staging for GIST?
Sorry, sir. Yes, sir.
Sorry,
You
sir.
know the staging for GIST. There is a staging for GIST.
Yes, sir. The American Society have decided, sir, where again TNM staging is followed, nodal metastasis, distant and bony metastasis, sir. So then again, if the size of the tumor is less than 5 centimeter, surgical can be done. If the size is more than 10 centimeters, initially they would plan for a neoadjuvant therapy followed by surgical excision, usually complete, and then followed by imatinib as lifelong.
So we are
So
running
there
out
is
of
2
time.
centimeter also option in that, right? Is it only 5 centimeter?
No, sir. Anything above this, sir.
You must
Above
look into the stage. Okay, right.
Yes, sir.
We will move on to the next presentation. Thank you. So this comes to conclusion of the posters.